A sharp, unbearable pain shot through his arm. His muscles felt like they were tearing apart again. A brutal reminder that this wasn't his indestructible godly body, but a fragile, weak human one. The commotion quickly caught the attention of the teacher, who stormed over, shouting angrily and demanding that they stop fighting immediately. But by now, the noise had also drawn the interest of the entire class. Heads turned, curious and intrigued by the sight of a fight breaking out in the middle of the room. The bully, feeling humiliated and furious after being punched by a nerd for the first time in his life, couldn't contain his anger any longer. Ignoring the teacher's yelling and the watching crowd, he charged straight at Mu, ready to unleash his fury. Mu immediately tried to defend himself and managed to block most of the attacks. Well, kind of. While defending, he couldn't help but think that he would have ended this fight a long time ago if his new body could actually keep up with him. For a brief moment, he considered using some of his godly powers, but to his shock, they didn't work. That moment of disbelief distracted him, and before he knew it, he took another punch to the face. At least this one wasn't as hard as the last one. The bully wasn't about to back off from the person he believed was Lee, not until he made him regret throwing that first punch. On the other hand, Mu found himself in a pretty bad spot. He couldn't muster the strength to fight back with this weak body. No punches, no kicks, and without his godly powers, he was left with only one option. In a sudden move, he lowered his head, aiming at a specific spot, and took the incoming punch directly on his skull. The bones of his skull were the only part of this body that he could count on. Just as he expected, the bully's fist slammed into his head, and the impact immediately made the guy break the bones in his fingers. The pain was so intense that the bully screamed like a baby, and in that moment, Mu couldn't help but feel like an absolute genius. To put an end to this ridiculous fight, Mu decided to take advantage of the bully's distraction before he could recover. This time, he was the one who rushed forward, grabbing the bully's hand in a sudden move. Without wasting a second, he used his head to strike, aiming directly at the guy's stomach, or maybe even his balls, knowing most guys' weak spots are right there. The bully was caught completely off guard, unable to handle yet another wave of unbearable pain. At the same time, Mu wasn't done yet. He wanted to make sure this guy would never forget this day for the rest of his life. With another swift move, Mu raised his head and slammed it into the bully's jaw. This time, the pain was too much for the bully to handle. His eyes rolled back and he dropped to his knees in front of Mu like a defeated loser before finally passing out. All of this happened while everyone else stood there in shock, recording the entire fight. Watching the weakest guy in school take down one of the school's biggest bullies wasn't something anyone could believe so easily. But for Mu, things were different. He had just fought someone for the first time in thousands of years, using every bit of strength he could muster. The feeling was incredible, but now wasn't the time to celebrate. As his excitement faded, the pain from all the hits he'd taken came rushing in all at once. He could taste a sticky, metallic flavor of blood in his mouth. At first, it didn't seem like something even God Mu could handle so easily, but it only took a moment for him to realize something surprising. He was more than okay with it. After such a long, hard time, it actually felt satisfying to experience the pain of a good fight again. A few moments later, when Mu's excitement finally settled, he stared at the unconscious boy's body like he wasn't done with him yet, sat down next to him, and for some reason, probably because the boy gave him such a tough fight, he thanked him. Then, in a completely unexpected move, Mu leaned in, lowered his head, opened his mouth wide, and bit the boy's ear, making blood splatter everywhere. But Mu didn't just bite the ear, he actually tore off a small piece of it and spat it on the ground right in front of all his classmates. Horror filled the air. None of the students could believe what Mu had just done. It was like watching a crazy person. Mu, however, didn't care about what anyone thought. He calmly wiped the blood off his face, still glaring at the boy's body, who, even after losing part of his ear, didn't so much as twitch. This wild act of biting off the bully's ear was actually Mu's way of leaving a mark on his opponent, someone who had given him a fight that he truly enjoyed. It was his twisted way of showing gratitude, while also marking them as someone worthy of his attention. These opponents were later referred to as Mu's playthings. However, it was clear only strong opponents who gave him exciting battles could earn a spot on this list. Back then, being called one of Mu's playthings was almost like a badge of honor, a symbol of strength.
Ironically, in a way, it was similar to how humans in some eras would mark animals to show they had been neutered, except Mu's mark wasn't about humiliation, but recognition. Soon enough, the story of the second-year bully who got beaten by the weakest guy in school spread faster than lightning. The most shocking part for everyone wasn't just that the bully got beaten, it was that he basically got neutered. The boy's condition was so bad that they had no choice but to call emergency medical services to come and take care of him. Like all the other curious students, Mu was also watching as they transferred Lee's classmate to the hospital. Of course, Mu didn't care about his health. He was more curious about how they managed to call for help so quickly using just a mobile phone. As the ambulance drove off, Mu waved his hand, saying goodbye to his first opponent and wishing to meet him again someday. That's when the teacher, who was absolutely furious, appeared behind them and ordered him to follow him to the teacher's office. The moment they got there, the teacher exploded, yelling at Mu and asking if he'd completely lost his mind. He demanded to know why he'd done something so wild and reckless to his classmate. At one point, the teacher's anger boiled over and he attempted to hit Mu with the binder in his hands. But Mu didn't flinch. He didn't even move an inch. Not only was he unbothered by the threat of punishment, but he actually blushed. He looked excited, thrilled even, as if he was already thinking about the chance to fight another opponent. Seeing Mu's expression made the teacher change his mind immediately and stop his hand midair. Not wanting to risk the same fate as a student in the hospital, he decided to skip the punishment altogether. Instead, he turned around and told Mu, who he believed was Lee, to bring his parents to school tomorrow. Mu had braced himself, expecting to get hit by the teacher. But when the punishment, which meant confirmation of the battle, didn't come, he gave up on the idea of fighting back. Just then, the teacher dismissed him, saying he could leave school earlier than the others. Without saying much, Mu did as he was told and left the school. On his way to Lee's house, Mu's mind wandered. Unlike other gods who have complete knowledge of the worlds they're responsible for, Mu wasn't sure what the teacher meant by leave earlier. Was it a suggestion to return to his base? Or something else? Since nothing else made sense, he assumed it was just that. He decided to use his unexpected free time to heal from the injuries he'd gotten earlier and train his fragile new body. If he wanted to fight more opponents in the future, he needed to get stronger. His hand was visibly shaking from the pain of the damage he'd taken. At that moment, he wished he could use some of his godly powers like mana to heal himself faster. Mana, as Mu understood it, was a power beyond what most humans were capable of. In some places, it was called chi, or chakra, but most gods referred to it as mana. To put it simply, mana was a life force that existed everywhere in nature. It gave humans extraordinary abilities, allowing them to become hunters in some worlds, wizards in others, or even powerful players in different realms. But here in this world, Mu couldn't rely on it. No matter how much he wanted to, for now, he would just have to endure the pain and focus on adapting to his new life and body. He tried once again to channel his mana, but it vanished within seconds. This reminded Mu of the moment during his earlier battle when he tried to use mana there too. Frustrated, he finally realized that he would need to focus solely on training his physical body and rely entirely on it from now on. Before long, Mu arrived at Lee's home and collapsed onto the bed, knowing that his recovery would take a lot of time and that there wasn't much he could do about it. He made the decision to return to the god's realm to check on what was happening there. In an instant, just like the day he first came to Earth, his soul shifted back to his original body. As soon as Mu regained consciousness, his eyes widened in shock. Right in front of him, Lee Ho was choking the dragonling, refusing to let the poor creature go. The weak boy who had always been bullied on Earth now turned to God Mu as soon as he noticed him. Letting go of the dragon, Lee approached Mu with a newfound confidence and demanded that Mu hand over the dragon to him. Lee didn't know who Mu really was. He had no idea he was talking to a god. All he knew was that he was only temporarily in this realm and would eventually leave again. Lee wanted to take control of the dragonling for himself, thinking he could use it to dominate in his new life. Mu, however, didn't like how Lee was acting so arrogant and commanding. Without hesitation, Mu summoned a godly hand and tightly grabbed hold of Lee, making it clear that he couldn't just order around his lord like that. Lee was completely shocked. He didn't expect this to happen at all. But God Mu didn't care about his protests or complaints and started dragging him off to somewhere else. Without a second thought, Mu had decided to give the boy a second chance to live in another world. but the look on his face suggested he had something else on his mind. Minutes later, they arrived at the domain of Lucifer, the second-ranked god in the divine realm. Mu entered the scene confidently, his firm steps making it clear to anyone around that he was there. Of course, there wasn't anyone else around except Lucifer himself, who, unlike Mu, was diligently keeping a close eye on his planet. Mu marched straight into Lucifer's castle without even bothering to ask for permission, walking in as casually as if Lucifer was just some ordinary guy. Naturally, Lucifer wasn't thrilled about Mu's rude behavior. Without even giving him a chance to explain why they were there, Lucifer immediately rejected whatever it was they wanted, not even bothering to hear them out. But Mu wasn't having it. He leaned in and reminded Lucifer who the stronger god was in this scenario, making it clear that he could do whatever he wanted.
To drive his point home, Mu added that if Lucifer doubted his strength, he was more than ready to prove it anytime, anywhere. Poor Lucifer knew he was no match for Mu, so he couldn't help but tremble in frustration. Seeing Lucifer hesitate and waste time, Mu stepped forward, deciding to handle everything himself, without waiting for Lucifer. As Mu approached and touched the surface of Elmer's planet, Lucifer, caught off guard, quickly reminded Mu that interfering with another god's domain was strictly forbidden among the gods. He warns Mu that if a god who isn't in charge of a domain touches it, an unbreakable barrier would activate and block all access. And just as Lucifer said, the barrier appeared, but to his complete disbelief, Mu effortlessly shattered it in seconds, something Lucifer never thought possible. Shocked, Lucifer stared at Mu, who calmly remarked that the rules of the universe could be changed easily if someone truly wanted to change them. Then, Mu opened his godly hand and released Lee, urging him to step forward and leap into the hole he had created on Elmer's planet. Lee hesitated, clearly scared, but Mu reminded him that this was what he had always asked for, and now the opportunity was right in front of him. Lee once again asked Mu to give him the dragonling so he could dominate in his new life, but Mu showed no intention of handing over his own assistant and simply shot Lee straight into Elmer's planet, forcefully sending him to Isekai. After that, Mu couldn't help but wonder why kids these days don't want to work for what they want and just expect everything to be handed to them on a silver platter. With things settled and nothing else left to do, Mu turned to Lucifer and casually told him to take good care of the kid before the party. Lucifer, on the other hand, humiliated and seething with anger, could only wish for the power to tear Mu limb from limb. Lucifer's story wasn't so different from Mu's. He was once known as the first demon lord in history, the one who stood above all life on Elmer's planet. After claiming the title of the strongest, Lucifer in his arrogance dared to challenge the god who ruled over his world back then. In the first moments of their battle, Lucifer summoned a blinding light that quickly transformed into a massive sword, a magical blade far larger than the god himself, and hurled it straight at him. Even the god couldn't withstand the sheer power of the attack. Overwhelmed, he was struck down, split in two by the massive sword, unable to dodge or defend himself. After defeating that god, Lucifer took his place. But even that wasn't enough to satisfy him. He went on to challenge every other god in the divine realm, defeating them one by one and claiming the ultimate throne. As a demon, he became the god of gods, absolute, invincible, supreme, legendary, and one of a kind among them. Before long, he earned everyone's respect, something he believed he truly deserved. But his days of glory didn't last. One day, Mu showed up and beat him just like he had crushed all the others before him, completely destroying Lucifer's mighty image in front of everyone. That day, consumed by rage and humiliation, Lucifer made a vow. He promised himself that he would get revenge for this disgrace, cursing Mu as a human-born bastard in his fury. Back to the present, Mu was casually riding atop his dragonling, heading toward his domain, completely unaware that something in the sky was secretly watching him. A demon, most likely sent by Lucifer, was spying on him to figure out what Mu was up to, and waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike back. Just like Lucifer, who was counting down the minutes for his chance to get revenge for his humiliation, the bully from Lee's school, who had just regained consciousness, couldn't wait to see Lee dead. Still lying in his hospital bed, the boy grabbed his phone and decided to call someone tougher to teach Lee a lesson. Fueled by burning anger, he scrolled through his contacts until he found the name of that person he was looking for. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, someone was going hard on a punching bag. That guy's name was Kang Chao, the youth division middleweight boxing champion. His intense training session was suddenly interrupted by an obnoxiously loud ringtone. Annoyed, Kang stopped mid-punch, sweat dripping down his body, and turned to see whose phone was making that ridiculous noise. That's when another guy, a blonde, walked in and casually said it was his phone. He strolled over, picked it up, and answered, sounding irritated. That guy was Hung Chell, a boxer with 2 years of experience under his belt. As expected, the caller was none other than the beaten-up bully. With desperation in his voice and without any introduction, he told Hung he'd buy him a new phone if he wanted, but asked him to do one small favor first. At first, Hung was a bit surprised to hear the request, but since it sounded like an easy and good deal, he agreed and asked what he needed to do in return. The next day, during class, when everything seemed normal again, the bully walked in as if nothing had happened the day before. As he made his way to his seat, the entire classroom suddenly went silent for a moment, with everyone's eyes fixed on him. Then the murmurs and whispers started. The students were talking about how someone who used to bully others ended up in such a pathetic state. At first, he tried to ignore it, but when the whispers turned into jokes about him being neutered, he couldn't take it anymore. To show he wasn't someone to mess with, he slammed his backpack on the floor and yelled at them saying he could still take them all down even when he got neutered. He challenged anyone who doubted his strength to fight him. That's when the class president, a girl with glasses, stood up and shouted back, telling him to either shut up or leave the classroom. Seeing that girl dared to talk to him like that for the first time only made him angrier. Frustrated that even the class president dared to stand up to him, he completely lost it. In a fit of rage, he grabbed a random chair and tried to throw it at her to remind everyone they should fear him like they used to before he could do anything. The door suddenly swung open and a massive Hulk-like teacher walked into the classroom, demanding to know what all the fuss was about. To everyone's surprise, the bully instantly dropped into his seat and acted as if nothing had happened. The teacher looked around and noticed the class president standing, clearly angry. He asked her what was going on and why she was out of her seat. However, the girl didn't spill the truth. Instead, she quickly returned to her seat and assured him it wasn't anything worth mentioning. The teacher didn't press further, but for some reason he told the girl to meet him after class, something that the girl got curious to know why. When the school day ended, she met him as instructed, and it turned out he wanted a favor. Since she was the class president and someone he could trust, he asked her to check on Lee Ho, who had been absent that day and wasn't answering his phone. In exchange, the teacher promised to write her a recommendation letter for her senior year. It was framed as a request, but the girl knew she couldn't exactly say no. Reluctantly, she agreed. Before long, she found herself standing in front of Lee's house, looking completely uninterested in whatever situation he might be in. Wanting to get this over with as quickly as possible, she didn't waste any time. She walked up to the door and knocked, calling out to see if anyone was home. When no one responded, she hesitated for a moment before deciding to check if the door was locked. Turning the doorknob, she realized it wasn't. To her surprise, the door wasn't locked, so she slowly stepped inside the house. The moment she walked in, she froze in shock. Right there in front of her was Lee's lifeless-looking body, surrounded by a filthy room where bugs seemed to be playing hide-and-seek. Lee's appearance was horrifying. His eyes had rolled back, completely white, and his mouth was open wide. The sight made the girl scream in terror, thinking Lee was dead. Without wasting another second, she grabbed her phone and called for an ambulance. The paramedics arrived quickly and rushed Lee to the nearest hospital. It didn't take long for the doctors to figure out what had happened. Lee had probably fainted from pure starvation. Abandoned by God Mu, who had left his body earlier, he was hospitalized and hooked up to a nutrient IV to stabilize him. Just then, something strange happened. As Lee's body lay still, it suddenly twitched. In an instant, Mu returned to Lee's body. The moment Mu opened his eyes, he was completely disoriented. The place didn't look familiar at all. Confused, he tried to figure out where he was and how he'd ended up here. Before he could make sense of anything, he felt something odd. Looking down, he realized something was attached to his hand. It was the fourth line, delivering the nutrient serum. As a god who had lived only for battle and fighting, Mu had no knowledge of human tools or technology in this era, and this strange serum was no exception. He stared at it with a mix of curiosity and unease, trying to process what was happening. Even though he didn't understand what the serum was, God Mu immediately figured out that it was sending something into his body, and only through his vessels. With his godly knowledge of what was happening inside him, it didn't take long for him to realize it was nutrients. He could sense his body absorbing them rapidly, speeding up his recovery. To Mu, it felt like some kind of healing magic, though he knew very well it wasn't magic. As Lee started moving his head around, regaining consciousness, the girl sitting nearby finally noticed he was awake. However,
The creepy smile on his face made her think he was a little crazy. Still, she asked Lee if he knew what had happened to him that caused him to faint. Not waiting for an answer, she grabbed her bag, stood up, and announced she was heading back to school to report everything to the teacher as he had asked her to. Mu quickly sat up and tried to stop her. He didn't know who this girl was exactly, but he assumed she was the one who had helped him recover so quickly. However, even after realizing that, he didn't thank her. Instead, in typical Mu fashion, he asked for something else entirely. The girl was in a hurry to leave, but Mu was eager to gather more information about Earth and how people lived here. Pulling the cereal out of his hand, he gave his usual creepy smile and asked if she knew a place where he could train to get stronger. The girl turned her head slightly and gave her a side glance. Honestly, in her eyes, this boy looked like anything but an athlete. Add to that the poor dirty condition of his house, it didn't exactly show if he really cared about sports. Still, after a moment of thought, she suggested a specific place for him. It wasn't anything fancy, just an outdoor gym at a nearby park with some simple workout equipment. Without wasting any time, Mu made his way to the park and began his training. He quickly started doing pull-ups on the bars, pushing his body as hard as he could. When he finally grew tired, he dropped to the ground to take a break, sweat dripping off his body, and as he looked around, Mu couldn't help but be impressed. To him, these simple pieces of exercise equipment looked like professional training tools. It had been almost 4,000 years since he'd last set foot on Earth, and after that, he hadn't bothered to check on human progress. As the Earth god, seeing even these basic workout machines left him in awe. In his time, humans trained with something entirely different, primitive methods that were far harder and less efficient. This modern equipment, though simple by human standards, was revolutionary in Mu's eyes. Mu started randomly testing each piece of equipment, even though he had no idea how any of them actually worked. Suddenly, in the middle of his training, something small, like a pebble, hit him in the back and fell to the ground. To his surprise, it was the beaten-up bully earlier. And this time he had brought someone along, a boxer named Hung, to fight him. Even with the boxer by his side, the bully acted like a barking dog, yelling insults at Lee from a safe distance, but not daring to step closer. Mu couldn't care less about his barking. Calmly, he sat down, picked up the rock, and asked who had thrown it. The beaten-up guy, feeling a little braver now that Hung was there to back him up, shouted that he was the one who did it. He started ranting about how Lee would pay for hurting him, bragging about how Hung, his cousin and a professional boxer, was going to beat him to death. But before he could finish explaining, Mu saw an opening and caught him off guard with a sudden punch. The guy hit the ground, screaming in pain as his already broken nose got smashed again. This was the result of starting a fight with God Mu by throwing a stone, and of course Mu couldn't be happier about it. That was on Earth, but in the realm of the gods, things were a bit more complicated.
The time for the usual meeting of the gods had arrived, but Mu was nowhere to be seen as his only assistant, the dragon Ling, had to attend the meeting in his place. With his lord absent, the nervous little dragon stuttered as he awkwardly began to deliver Mu's message. Before the dragonling could even get through the first few words of the letter, Lucifer suddenly interrupted. Glaring at the dragon, he demanded to know why a mere assistant dared to step into a meeting meant for gods, let alone speak first as if he were someone important. Lucifer's intimidating demeanor scared the poor dragonling out of his wits. Panicked, the dragon quickly clarified that he was only there to deliver a message from God Mu and had no intention of disrespecting or offending anyone with his presence. Determined to fulfill his duty and get out of there before things escalated, the dragonling began to read the letter with a trembling voice. But the message turned out to be nothing out of the ordinary. As usual, Mu was simply asking the gods to let him know if they came across any worthy opponents for him to fight. That was it. Lucifer couldn't hold back his anger after hearing that and slammed the table with a resounding bang. As the second most powerful god in the divine realm, he couldn't stand how Mu not only did whatever he pleased, but now even ignored the meeting and the gods entirely. Lucifer wasn't wrong, and most of the gods silently agreed with him. However, even in Mu's absence, none of them dared to openly criticize him. Lucifer pressed on, declaring that the gods' meeting was meant to ensure the stability and safety of their worlds. As the third strongest god, and of course as someone already in Mu's playthings list, the archer god finally spoke up.
He argued that if, same as always, any abnormalities occurred even on Earth, they were the ones who always should take care of them instead of Mu, and that was most unacceptable thing for strongest god around them. Seizing the moment, Lucifer slammed the table again, his voice booming with frustration. He shouted that Mu's habit of treating everything like a game was pushing all the worlds to the brink of collapse. In his opinion, the few times Mu actually decided to solve something usually ended up making things worse. To make his argument more convincing, Lucifer turned to the god of Cyclops, the 9th-ranked deity in the divine realm, and asked if he remembered what Mu had done 1,000 years ago when the Cyclops planet was on the brink of destruction. Back then, a massive, ugly creature as large as the Cyclops planet itself attacked a rare being known as a void creature, capable of devouring an entire planet in seconds. Just as the void creature began tearing the Cyclops planet apart, something suddenly shot straight through the middle of it, splitting it into 2 unequal pieces. That something, of course, was God Mu, with his usual cheerful and flushed face, delighted at the chance for a fight. Mu had effortlessly killed the enormous creature in an instant. Lucifer used this event to drive his point home, trying to make everyone, especially the Cyclops god, see that Mu was to blame for the aftermath of the destruction. He explained that if Mu had cooperated with the other gods instead of acting alone, there wouldn't have been any casualties. Having made his case and likely swaying the other gods to his side, Lucifer declared that they could no longer stand by and let someone unfit to be a god continue risking the safety of their worlds. On the other side, the dragonling was left speechless. He couldn't do or say anything to defend his lord. The only thing he could do was silently pray, beg his lord to return before things spiraled even further out of control. The scene shifts back to Earth, where the beaten guy started making noise again. He barked at Mu, warning him that his boxer cousin is gonna make him pay for what he did to him. Young, the so-called boxer cousin, was intrigued. He couldn't help but be a little impressed by how fast Mu had moved and punched earlier. Curious, he asked if Mu practiced any sports, like martial arts, but Mu casually replied that he didn't play any sports because all he wanted was to fight, not play. Mu's response, however, made Hung think of him as nothing more than an overconfident dumb middle schooler. Spitting out his chewing gum with a smirk, Hung took a fighting stance and said he was ready to fight, just as Mu had apparently wanted. Hung decided to start first, moving quickly to test this guy and see if he was all talk or actually had some skill. His opening strike was fast and sharp, landing hard on Mu's face, before Mu could dodge or block. But despite the satisfaction of landing the first blow, something about Mu stunned Hung. There was something strange, something downright unusual about this opponent, and it sent a chill running up his spine. As an experienced boxer who carefully observed his opponent's movements, Hung found it strange that Mu didn't move an inch even when he had clearly been watching the punch coming from the start. Just like the beaten guy who had hired him, Hung had no idea that his opponent wasn't human, but a god. And not just any god, a god who was absolutely obsessed with fighting. What Hung also didn't know was that Mu never dodged a preemptive strike. For him, taking the first hit was like a signal confirming that the battle had officially begun. With his usual unsettling, overly excited grin, Mu suddenly shouted, "Is hand-to-hand combat your favorite thing?" His creepy smile and strange behavior made Hung wonder if this guy was just some crazy teenager. Then, out of nowhere, Mu mimicked Hung's fighting stance and launched himself forward. Hung didn't take it seriously at all, thinking it was just a dumb copycat move. When Mu threw a punch, Hung blocked it with his hand, effortlessly, or so he thought. The force behind Mu's punch sent Hung sliding backwards, surprising him completely. His hand throbbed in pain from underestimating his opponent's strength. He couldn't believe how much power this seemingly weak and scrawny guy had. Meanwhile, Mu looked even more thrilled. His face lit up with excitement as he realized his attack had worked perfectly, just by copying what Hung had done earlier. There was one thing Mu had to take into account. His current body wasn't something he could rely on just yet. When he tensed his muscles as hard as he could at the moment of impact, the strain left his arm muscles screaming in pain like they wanted to quit and take a break. Of course, Mu didn't care about the state of his muscles or how much pain they were suffering. In fact, the more pain he endured, the more he enjoyed the fight. For him, it only made the battle even more satisfying. The thrill of this fight couldn't even compare to the feeling of battling creatures in his godly form. It was raw and exhilarating in a completely different way. Suddenly, to Young's surprise, Mu pulled off his belt and wrapped it around his fist. The fact that his current fragile body could cause trouble for him, especially since recovery and healing would take significantly longer, pushed him to come up with this idea. The beaten guy, still watching from the sidelines, thought using a belt made the fight unfair, but neither Mu nor Hyun cared about his opinion. Hung rushed forward again, this time fully aware that he couldn't afford to underestimate Mu. He started throwing punches left-right, one after another, trying to overwhelm him with speed and power. Mu managed to block most of the incoming strikes, but even so, he found himself in a pretty rough situation. His movements were limited by the pain in his body, and Hung's attacks were relentless. In the middle of defending himself, Mu started analyzing his opponent's movements, only to realize they were fast and precise, but way too predictable. Just by observing Hung's fighting style, Mu quickly began to anticipate his every move. At first it was hard to figure out, but less than a minute into the fight, Mu was already dodging Hung's attacks with ease. And if that wasn't enough, when Hung tried to catch him off guard with a different move, Mu not only blocked the attack, but also turned the tables by punching his arm mid-swing. It only took seconds for Young to process what just happened and how his arm ended up broken. He began screaming as the shock wore off and the pain set in. Mu watched him silently, almost amused by the way he reacted. The screaming made Mu wonder if Hyung and that guy from Lee's class were really cousins or something, as they seemed to share the same overdramatic tendencies. Mu didn't waste much time though. He sealed his victory with another sudden punch to the distracted Hyung, knocking him out cold for a little while. The sight left his friend or cousin or whoever he was completely stunned. Things went from worse to better for him as Mu's face shifted into a scary, excited expression, practically radiating his eagerness to fight. He declared it was time to pay for all the trouble caused, especially since this wasn't the first time they'd messed with him. The once bully, the guy who had been so arrogant earlier, knew in that moment that with Hae-young out of the picture, there was no one left to save him. He had no doubt that a painful fate awaited him now, and there was no escaping it. Mu slowly walked toward Lee's classmate to settle things for the day. As he got closer to the beaten-up guy, Mu noticed that the guy had no intention or will to fight back, and so there was no joy or honor in beating up someone acting so scared. The beaten-up guy for a moment noticed Mu's hesitation and thought that if he kept acting this way and just admitted he didn't want to fight anymore, everything might end peacefully. But it was too late to play the victim now. Before he even had the chance to say anything, Mu punched him in the face in one quick move. After all, this was the same guy who had started today's fight by throwing that small stone and bringing a boxer to take Mu down. He couldn't back out now, and even if he wanted to, Mu already had more than enough reason to beat him again. As expected, Mu didn't show a shred of mercy and kept hitting him however he wanted, testing out his new copied fighting techniques on his opponent's body one after another. Even as the guy's face and body were covered in bruises and blood, Mu wasn't satisfied. He finished it off with one final brutal knee strike straight to his guy's already battered face. After putting all his strength into making this an unforgettable day for that guy, Mu finally felt satisfied. He wondered with a mocking tone in his mind, why wouldn't they just admit defeat? But deep down, Mu knew he hadn't given the poor guy even the slightest chance to do so. After finishing with both of them, Mu walked away, knowing he had other things to take care of. Not to mention, like all of his previous opponents, he left his mark on that boxer and added him to his growing list of playthings.
The beaten-up bully, on the other hand, after learning his painful lesson, was muttering Lee's name under his breath, calling him a crazy bastard. It wasn't long before Mu returned to Lee's house. Sitting on his bed, he felt great, knowing everything was going exactly as he wanted, and he could enjoy fighting almost every day. However, just like before, his weak muscles and fragile bones that often gave him trouble, even breaking easily while defending himself, were annoying and a bit concerning. Still, in order to hold on to this feeling, a mix of fighting opponents stronger than him and experiencing the pain and recovery throughout his body, Mu decided he would do whatever it took. He decided to return to the God Realm first, to see what was going on there, and to get what he had asked the Dragonling to prepare for him. Like always, he focused, and while sitting, tried to leave Lee's body and return to his original form. But this time, unlike before, when his soul would transfer instantly, several seconds passed and nothing happened. Mu slowly opened his eyes and squinted, glancing around, only to realize he was still in Lee's house. He couldn't help but wonder why he couldn't return to his body in the God realm. The reason for this incident went back to a few days ago in Lucifer's domain. That was when a Chi had forcefully thrown Lee onto Elmer's planet without Lucifer's permission. As we already know, in that day, Mu had completely ignored Lucifer, and without caring about his opinion, he came and went as he pleased, unaware that his actions were pushing Lucifer to his limits. On his way back to his domain that day, the Dragonling had asked Mu about his journey to Earth. Mu explained how much he enjoyed it, but also mentioned the weakness of his new body. During that conversation, Mu had ordered his assistant to find a recovery magic orb for him while he was gone, hoping it would help his weak body on Earth recover faster. There was just one small problem. Magical items were common on Elmer, and a few other planets under Lucifer's control. They were abundant in those worlds because of the plentiful mana there. Unlike Earth, where magical items objects can only be obtained through divine blessings or whims, they are incredibly rare. Because of that, only a handful of people throughout human history have been able to use them naturally. Those who could were often regarded as godlike beings by humans. Not long after Mu arrived at his domain, where the Dragonling had promised to find the recovery magic orb for him the next time he returned to the God realm. When Mu got off the dragon, his assistant reminded him once again about the upcoming gods meeting. That's when Mu casually searched in his pants, saying he had prepared something for him. Because of all the complaining, to the assistant's disbelief, it wasn't anything grand, just a small letter. And of course, we already know what's written inside it. After delivering his message and doing what he considered his responsibility, Mu approached the miniature Earth model and placed his hand on its surface again to return to Lee's body. The Dragonling, clearly annoyed, angrily tried to convince some to at least wait and attend the meeting before leaving. But all the complaints fell on deaf ears as Mu completely ignored him, just like before, and transferred his soul back to Earth. Unbeknownst to both of them, a small demon hovered in the sky, silently observing and reporting every move to Mu's greatest enemy. The scene shifted back to the present, where Lucifer was analyzing the situation. He had no idea what Mu was up to, but he was certain his body was now empty of a soul. The fact that Mu hadn't shown up for the meeting made Lucifer realize he wouldn't be in the God's realm for a while. That's when it hit Lucifer, realizing the time has come to act. This was his chance, a once-in-a-thousand-years opportunity to finally get his revenge. There was no way he was going to miss it. Without any warning and determined to get rid of the one obstacle standing between him and Mu, Lucifer suddenly used his life taxidermy spell. As the spell activated, sharp purple lightning bolts shaped like spears appeared above the Dragonling. But the Dragonling's sharp senses didn't fail him, not one to be caught off guard. He leaped back just in time, dodging every single spear-like attack in less than the blink of an eye. His previously awkward and ashamed expression quickly shifted to one of seriousness and readiness for battle. With a firm voice, he demanded an explanation. "What's the meaning of this?" he asked sharply. His eyes glowed with intensity as he pressed further, seeking confirmation. "Lucifer, are you seriously declaring war against Mu, the god of Earth? Are you serious?" Lucifer, now filled with confidence, knowing Mu wasn't around to interfere, floated slowly in midair. Then, with a booming voice, he declared that he would personally expel Mu from the seat of divinity. He knew exactly what those words meant, and he didn't hesitate to confirm it. It was an official declaration of war. The Dragonling didn't waste any time. Without hesitation, he compressed his fiery breath and unleashed a deadly blast of flames that looked more like a laser, shooting straight toward Lucifer. At first, it seemed like Lucifer was caught off guard by the sudden attack. But even without expecting it, he effortlessly dodged it with ease. Strangely, instead of dissipating, the dragon's attack spun around the god's planet-like realm and exploded violently on the far side of it. The explosion was massive, so intense that the archer god had to quickly conjure a magical shield. First, he used it to protect himself, then extended it to shield the other gods attending the meeting. Unlike the others, Lucifer didn't flinch. He didn't move a muscle, not to run, not to shield himself, nothing.
The waves and flames from the explosion, like the aftermath of a nuclear blast, soon reached the meeting, roaring toward them with unstumbled force. As expected from the gods, neither Lucifer nor the Dragonling nor anyone else took any damage. Realizing his first deadly attack had been completely useless against Lucifer, the Dragonling decided to use his ultimate move, Polymorph Release. The moment he activated it, his entire body began to transform. Not just his arms and legs, but every part of him started expanding. Wild red lightning crackled around him, and a fierce aura surrounded the dragon, making it clear how serious he was about protecting his master. But even after such a legendary transformation, Lucifer wasn't the least bit impressed. In fact, it was quite the opposite. The demon god smirked and announced confidently, "I'll deal with you as Moo's little bro easily. Then it'll be Moo's turn to pay for what he did to me." The dragon, though, had no intention of letting that happen. He was fully committed to defending his master, no matter what it cost him. But things didn't go as the dragon planned. Moo's royal assistant was easily defeated by Lucifer, not even able to leave a scratch on him. His entire body was trapped in Lucifer's life taxidermy spell, leaving him immobile and badly injured. The archer god let out a sigh and decided to leave, casually stating that the atmosphere here wasn't suitable anymore for a proper godly meeting. Everyone else, however, was left frozen in shock, stunned by the aftermath of the battle between Lucifer and the Dragonling. They were too scared to make a move, let alone help either side. The archer god's departure didn't escape Lucifer's notice. Suddenly, Lucifer called out to him, and with a piercing side glance, demanded to know whose side he was on, whether he supported the expulsion or opposed it. The archer guard, however, just kept floating away, casually responding that he was neutral, neither supporting nor opposing. Lucifer didn't like the answer, but he made it clear he was fine with that, as long as the archer guard didn't interfere. Then, turning to the rest of the gods, Lucifer coldly asked if anyone objected to Moo's expulsion. But after witnessing the Dragonling, state of someone as powerful as a god, utterly defeated, none of them dared to speak up. Meanwhile, the dragon was still alive and tried to warn Lucifer, reminding him that he was no match for God Mu. But Lucifer just smirked and responded with a chilling revelation. He knew that Mu wasn't here, and instead living in a weak, pathetic human body on Earth. The Dragonling was stunned. He hadn't expected Lucifer to know the secret, especially since he thought he was the only one aware of it. And in that moment, everything started to click. It all made sense now. Why Lucifer had decided to suddenly rebel against Mu. Lucifer, however, didn't admit that he'd learned the secret by spying on God Mu. Instead, he shifted the blame onto the Dragonling, claiming that his overconfidence in his strength and lack of vigilance had given Lucifer the opportunity to figure it out. The dragon couldn't stand to hear such disrespectful words. With no other options left, he decided to make one last desperate attempt to stop Lucifer. Using his massive tail, he launched a surprise attack, hoping to catch Lucifer off guard. But once again, things didn't go as planned. Lucifer remained perfectly still, pretending not to notice until the very last second. Then, with precision and ease, he dodged the attack and slashed through the dragon's tail with a magical weapon. Whether it was a spear or a sword, it didn't even matter. Lucifer's power was undeniable. The poor dragon's tail was cut into several pieces, and there was a reason Lucifer didn't just finish him. He knew that as long as Mu's assistant was alive, he could use him to find Mu on Earth. The thought of confronting him in that weak human body and making him suffer after all the humiliation Lucifer had endured filled him with satisfaction. His devilish laughter echoed in the air while the dragon coughed the blood repeatedly, his body trembling and powerless to do anything to stop Lucifer. Later that day on Earth, things weren't looking much better for Hae-Yong-Young. Covered in wounds, he was getting harshly scolded by his coach for getting into a street fight. To make matters worse, he was being forced to take a long recovery break right before his important matches. After the lecture, his coach finally dismissed him, and as Hung made his way out of the gym, he couldn't help but mentally blame Lee for the mess he's in. Just as he reached the exit door, Kang walked into the gym, leaving the two of them awkwardly face to face. Kang immediately noticed Hung's beaten-up appearance and sour mood. Without hesitation, he asked what had happened to him. In his Hung, feeling embarrassed, he couldn't bring himself to admit that he'd been beaten by some random weak-looking guy. Knowing that Kang was one of the best boxers in the country, a sneaky idea popped into Hung's head. He lowered his bruised face, putting on a shameful and sad expression, and started lying about what had happened to him.
In his hand,
Hung, feeling embarrassed, couldn't bring himself to admit that he'd been beaten by some random, weak-looking guy. Knowing that Kang was one of the best boxers in the country, a sneaky idea popped into Hyung's head. He lowered his bruised face, putting on a shameful and sad expression, and started lying about what had happened. To make it more convincing, he even forced himself to cry, letting tears fall onto the floor as he explained how he had stepped in to help his brother, who was being bullied, only to have the bullies gang up on him and beat him mercilessly. He really went all out, crying like a little kid and covering his face, trying to look like an innocent victim who was just trying to do the right thing. To Hyung's surprise, Kang didn't seem moved at all. He simply ignored the tears and walked past him casually, reminding Hung that he had no one to blame but himself. Kang told him he needed to be more careful, especially before his competitions, and walked away without another word. Seeing his plan fail and with Kang now out of sight, Hung immediately stopped crying, his face shifting to one of disappointment. But just as he turned to leave, he froze when Kang suddenly called out, "By the way." For a moment, Hung panicked, thinking Kang had seen right through him and realized the whole thing was a fake act. But to his surprise, it was the complete opposite. Kang actually believed him and was now asking for the name of the person who had done this to him. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Mu was still sitting on Lee's dirty bed. He couldn't stop thinking about why he couldn't return to his original body, his frustration and confusion growing by the second. Based on his divine knowledge and, of course, his experience, there could only be one reason why he wasn't able to return. It had to be that his body was seriously damaged. Even this reason didn't sit right with Mu. He was convinced that not only was a dragonling, someone as strong as a god, protecting him, but his godly body wasn't something that could be easily harmed. His eyes widened in shock as the realization hit him. He pieced the whole incident together and thought, what if all the gods joined forces to attack me? That seemed to make the most sense. He suddenly jumped out of the bed, panicked. If his theory was right, he didn't have time to waste. He needed to act fast. But try as he might, he couldn't think of anything to do, and that only made him angrier. Frustrated, he punched Lee's pillow to release his anger. The thought that things could spiral out of control if he didn't return to his body made him feel even worse. The idea that those gods who wouldn't dare face him one-on-one were now cowardly taking advantage of his situation was unbearable. Unable to hold back his fury, Mu started punching the bed and the pillow repeatedly. In his mind, he wished for just one chance to turn the tables and teach all those cowardly gods a lesson. If he got that chance, he vowed to make stew out of the lot of them. Finally, after a few minutes of messing around, he got tired and stopped punching. He realized it was better to calm down and think things through. He reminded himself that the Dragon Ling, his protector, wasn't someone who'd go down easily, even if all the gods teamed up against him. That thought helped God Mu calm down a little. He started to think, if I can't do anything about my original body right now, I might as well focus on this one. At least it'll give me a better chance of staying alive. With that in mind, he headed back to the training area. This time, he was putting his full effort into strengthening the rest of his body, ignoring his arm muscles for the moment. Training his abdominal muscles for the first time made Mu feel like they were screaming in pain. But oddly enough, that pain made the training more enjoyable for him. While he was hanging and pulling himself up, the more pain he felt, the louder he laughed. He laughed so hard, it echoed around the place. Of course, his obnoxious laughter made everyone around him think he was some crazy, creepy kid. Just hearing and seeing him annoyed them to no end. In the middle of his intense training, someone suddenly called his name. The unexpected voice startled Mu, causing him to lose focus and fall straight to the ground with a loud thud. The person who called him was none other than the girl from before, Lee's class president. She was clearly annoyed, but not because of Mu's loud noises. No, she was upset because Lee hadn't shown up to school for several days. To avoid making a scene, they decided to have their conversation somewhere calmer. They found a bench and a quiet corner and sat down. Mu started the conversation casually, saying, "Why would I need to go to school? It's not exactly a place where I can train my body." Hearing this, the girl frowned and asked, "Why does he want to train all the time?" Mu shrugged and replied simply, "I train to get stronger. That's it." The class president tilted her head and asked, "And
"Why do you want to get stronger?" Mu grinned and said, "To fight better and take on bigger opponents, of course. My body's too weak right now, and that makes everything harder." From there, Mu launched into an excited rant, rambling on about his reasons for fighting and training. He talked for hours, barely stopping to breathe. The girl had no choice but to sit there and listen to his endless nonsense. By the time the sun was starting to set, she still hadn't managed to convince Mu, to come back to school. She was running out of ideas, but then suddenly an idea clicked. Casually, as if it were no big deal, she said, "What's the point of training so hard if there's no one to fight you?" Her words hung in the air, catching Mu completely off guard. To make his point clear, he asked Lee to take a look around, pointing out that there's no one here who could challenge him, no matter how strong he gets. The girl stood up, and as she started to leave, she said, "All you have to do is come to school, meet some people, and start some conflict. Then you'll have plenty of people to fight." With that, she walked off, leaving the boy to think it over. As she left, Mu couldn't help but feel a little impressed by her reasoning. She had a point. After what he did to those poor bullies, they wouldn't dare come near him again. And without them, he needed to find someone stronger to fight if he wanted to improve and make this body stronger. For the first time, he actually considered going to school. Just as he was mulling it over, a shadowy figure appeared behind him and called out asking if he was Leo. The figure was wearing a mask to hide his identity and carrying a weapon. Mu, on the other hand, didn't bother answering the question. He already knew what this was about. His shocked expression shifted into one of relief. Things were going much easier than he expected. Now he didn't even need to search for his next opponent, as his opponent had come straight to him. With a small smirk, Mu simply turned his head, calmly preparing himself for the inevitable first strike and the confirmation of battle.